She walked into Billionaire CEO's wedding to hand him a diaper and divorced papers. "You have a son. His name is Gabriel. He is 4 months old. He has your eyes and my stubbornness. And he deserves better than a father who runs from consequences. That is not possible. It is biology, Jonathan. It is very possible. It happened the night before I found Vivian's earring on our bathroom counter. The night you told me you loved me more than anything in the world. Remember that night? Because the first do. I remember every single word. And then I remember the morning after, when everything those words meant turned to nothing. Pamela, why did you not tell me? Why did you keep this from me? Because the last thing you said to me was that I could not understand your world. So I decided you did not need to understand mine. 300 guests. A cathedral that cost $2.7 million to decorate. A bride in a gown worth more than most people's homes. A groom worth $4.2 billion. And a woman in a black dress she designed herself, standing 6 feet from the altar, holding a clean diaper in one hand and unsigned divorce papers in the other. This is not a movie. This is not fiction dressed up in dramatic lighting. This is the story of a woman who was erased, who was replaced, who was abandoned while carrying a child she never told the man about. And when that man tried to start a new life without finishing the one he destroyed, she walked through 300-pound cathedral doors and handed him the 2 things he had been running from. A diaper and the truth. But before I take you inside that cathedral, before I show you what happened when Pamela's heels hit that marble floor and every head in the room turned to watch the past walk straight into the present, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been so completely erased from someone's life that they started building a new future while you were still bleeding from the one they burned down? Have you ever watched the person who shattered you move forward like you were nothing but a rough draft they crumpled up and threw away? Have you ever held the pieces of what someone broke and thought, "This is all I have left," and then decided to build something extraordinary from those pieces anyway? If you have, then this story is for you. Because Pamela did not walk into that cathedral as a scorned woman looking for revenge. She walked in as a mother, a founder, a self-made millionaire who built an empire from the wreckage of betrayal. She walked in because a man who owed her a signature had spent 11 months pretending she did not exist, and she was done being invisible. What happened inside that cathedral did not just stop a wedding. It detonated a legacy, and by the time she walked back out into the sunlight, nothing would ever be the same. Not for Jonathan, not for Vivian, not for the 4-month-old boy sleeping in a car seat 3 blocks away who had no idea his entire world was about to shift. Before I take you through those doors, I need you to do something. If you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever been overlooked or discarded by someone who should have chosen you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Mr. Dawson's Stories and turn on notifications, because this story is going to make you feel something you have not felt in a long time. And trust me, you are going to want to stay until the very last word. Now, let me take you to the Cathedral of the Sacred Heart in downtown Richmond, Virginia. On a spring afternoon that 300 people thought would be the social event of the year. They had no idea what was coming. The cathedral doors weighed 300 pounds each. Pamela knew this because she had once dreamed of walking through them in white lace, with orchids trembling in her hands and the man she loved waiting at the altar with tears in his eyes. That dream had died 14 months ago in a penthouse overlooking the Pacific, buried beneath whispered phone calls, lipstick that was not hers on collars that were, and the slow, surgical dismantling of everything she had believed was permanent. Now she stood outside those same doors wearing a black Valentino dress she had designed herself. Not purchased, designed, cut, sewn, during the darkest hours of her pregnancy, when sleep refused to come and the sewing machine became her only confidant. The dress was not revenge. It was armor, every stitch a decision, every seam a boundary. Every line of that garment said the same thing: I survived you, and I did it with style. In her left hand, she held a manila envelope. Inside it were divorce papers Jonathan Edwards had conveniently never signed. His attorneys had returned them twice, claiming procedural errors that any first-year law student would recognize as fabricated. 11 months of legal obstruction. 11 months of a man refusing to end what he had already destroyed. In her right hand, tucked against her hip, she held a single newborn diaper. Clean, folded, symbolic, the kind of object that changes the meaning of every room it enters. She was not nervous, She had spent the entirety of her nervousness 14 months ago, kneeling on the bathroom floor of her childhood bedroom in Vermont watching 2 pink lines appear on a pregnancy test 3 weeks after her world collapsed. After that, nothing could make her nervous. Not billionaires, not cathedrals, not the judgment of 300 strangers who had no idea what they were about to witness. Inside that building, Jonathan Edwards was standing at the altar, 38 years old, the youngest CEO to ever helm a Fortune 100 company, 3 Forbes covers, 1 Time magazine feature, a man who had built Edwards Capital into a $4.2 billion empire through the sheer force of intelligence, charisma, and an absolute refusal to let anyone see what he was really made of. He was about to marry Vivian Hale, pharmaceutical heiress, a woman whose cheekbones could cut crystal and whose ambition made serpents look slow. Their union had been on every society page from Manhattan to Milan. The merger of the decade, they called it. 2 empires becoming one under stained glass and promises that would taste like ash before the reception champagne went flat. But here is what those society pages did not know. Here is what the 300 guests inside that cathedral had no idea about. Jonathan Edwards was still legally married to the woman standing outside those doors with a diaper and a folder full of truth. 3 blocks away, Pamela's mother Dorothy sat in the passenger seat of a rental car, holding a 4-month-old boy named Gabriel, who was sleeping with the absolute peace of someone who did not yet know the world was complicated. Dorothy had driven through the night from Vermont with the kind of determination only grandmothers and war generals possess. That morning, while Pamela stood in front of the hotel mirror, trying to recognize the woman staring back at her, Dorothy had said something. "You do not have to do this. You can mail those papers. You can let the lawyers handle it. You do not owe that man a single second more of your time." Pamela had not turned from the mirror. She had finished applying her lipstick, a shade called Conviction, which she found privately appropriate. And then she had replied with the calm of someone who had already survived the worst thing that could happen to her. "It is not about what I owe him. It is about what I owe myself. He does not get to stand at that altar and pretend I never existed. He does not get to start a new life without finishing the one he broke." Dorothy had studied her daughter for a long moment, 30 years of motherhood compressed into a single glance, and then she had nodded. "Then I am coming with you. Someone needs to hold that baby while you set fire to his fairy tale." That was 2 hours ago. Now Pamela stood alone outside the cathedral. She could hear the organ music through the stone walls. Bach, a prelude she recognized because Jonathan had once played it for her on the piano in their living room. Barefoot, laughing when he missed the notes, pulling her onto the bench beside him so their hips touched and the music became secondary to the warmth between them. That memory almost stopped her, almost sent her retreating through those 300-pound doors into the safety of silence and anonymity and the clean, uncomplicated act of simply mailing the papers and moving on. But Pamela had not survived 14 months of silence to stay quiet now. She pressed her palms flat against the cathedral doors, felt the cold of the wood, the weight of it, the resistance, and then she pushed. The doors opened, and the organ music hit her like a wave. The cathedral was breathtaking, vaulted ceilings rising 60 feet above her, stained glass windows throwing colored light across white marble floors, flower arrangements that probably cost more than most people's cars lining every pew. The air was heavy with perfume and expectation and the particular kind of silence that fills a room when something sacred is about to happen. 300 people sat in those pews, men in bespoke suits, women in designer dresses, diamonds catching light from every direction. This was the upper echelon of American wealth and power, assembled to witness what they believed was the love story of the year. They were about to get a very different story. Pamela walked down the center aisle, not quickly, not slowly, with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who understood that every step was a sentence in a narrative she was writing in real time. Her heels struck the marble floor with a rhythm that cut through the organ music like a metronome of reckoning. Click, click, click. Each step carrying the weight of 14 months of silence. Each step bringing her closer to the man who had taught her that love could be a weapon and absence could be a choice, and sometimes the people who promise you forever mean it for about 18 months. Heads began to turn. The back rose first. Distant cousins, business associates, people who recognized disruption before they recognized the source. They saw a woman in black walking down the aisle of a wedding she was clearly not part of, and their brains struggled to categorize the anomaly. Then the middle rose. Closer friends, board members, investors who had attended Pamela and Jonathan's engagement party 2 years ago and were now performing the impossible mental gymnastics of watching history fold back on itself. She saw recognition dawn on their faces like slow sunrises. The whispers began, spreading through the pews like fire through dry grass. That cannot be. Oh my God, that is Pamela. Then the front rows. Margaret Edwards, Jonathan's mother, a woman who had once called Pamela the best thing to ever happen to her son. Her face drained of color so completely she looked carved from chalk. Her hand reached for the arm of the man beside her, gripping it like she was trying to anchor herself against a tide she could not stop. Vivian's father sat on the opposite side, rigid in his seat, already calculating the public relations damage with the mathematical precision of a man who had spent 40 years protecting a pharmaceutical empire from exactly this kind of uncontrolled variable. And then, Jonathan. He stood at the altar in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, his dark hair swept back from his forehead. His jaw set in that expression Pamela had once found devastatingly handsome and now found simply devastating. He was facing the officiant, his back partially turned to the aisle, engaged in the scripted choreography of a ceremony that was costing someone $2.7 million. But something made him turn. Maybe the whispers, maybe the shift in atmospheric pressure that happens when 300 people simultaneously hold their breath. Maybe some deeper instinct, the kind that tells you the past is standing behind you before you see its face. He turned, and he saw her. Everything on his face collapsed. Not gradually, not in stages, all at once, like a building detonating from the inside. The composure, the confidence, the carefully maintained mask of a man who controlled boardrooms and negotiations, and the emotional temperature of every room he entered. All of it went to dust in the space between one heartbeat and the next. His lips parted. His eyes went wide. The color left his skin so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. Pamela. He breathed her name, and the lapel microphone pinned to his suit caught it, broadcast it through the cathedral speakers, so every single guest heard his former wife's name echo off the vaulted ceiling like a confession pulled from a man who had been running from it for over a year. Vivian Hale turned sharply. She was standing opposite Jonathan in a gown that cost more than most people's houses. Ivory silk, hand-sewn lace, a cathedral-length train that pooled behind her like a small ocean of entitlement. Her expression went from confusion to recognition to something cold and hard in about 3 seconds. She had been warned this might happen, by her publicist, by her father, by the quiet voice in the back of her own mind that she had spent months suffocating with champagne and certainty. She had chosen not to believe it. Now belief was walking toward her in a black dress and heels that sounded like a countdown. Pamela stopped 6 feet from the altar, close enough to be heard without shouting, far enough to maintain the dignity she refused to surrender. She stood between 300 witnesses and the man who had once been her entire world, and she did not tremble. She did not flinch. She did not cry. She had done all of that already. 14 months of trembling and flinching and crying in a childhood bedroom in Vermont, while a baby grew inside her and an empire grew around her, and the man responsible for both sat in a penthouse somewhere pretending none of it existed. That was over now. "Hello, Jonathan." She said it calmly, almost conversationally, as if they had run into each other at a grocery store and not in the middle of his wedding to another woman. "I apologize for the interruption. This will not take long." She held up the manila envelope. "You never signed these. Your attorneys returned them twice claiming procedural errors that do not exist. I have spent 11 months trying to legally end a marriage you apparently cannot be bothered to officially dissolve, so I brought them to you personally." She extended the envelope toward him. Jonathan did not move. His hands hung at his sides like they had forgotten their purpose, like the neural pathways between his brain and his limbs had been severed by the sheer impossibility of what he was seeing. "Take them," Pamela said quietly. "Sign them. Let me go." The silence in the cathedral was absolute. 300 people holding 300 breaths. The officiant clutched his Bible against his chest like a shield. The string quartet had stopped mid-note, their bows frozen above the strings like the music itself had been stunned into silence. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering, as if the air had forgotten how to move. Jonathan finally found words, though they came out fractured and wrong, like a man trying to speak in a language he had suddenly forgotten. "Pamela, this is not." You cannot just— I can, she interrupted. I did. And there is something else. She lifted the diaper, held it up between them. A small, white, impossibly ordinary object suspended in the space between two people whose history was anything but ordinary. She held it like evidence in a trial that had been waiting 14 months for its opening argument. You have a son, she said. His name is Gabriel. He is 4 months old. He has your eyes and my stubbornness, and he deserves better than a father who runs from consequences. The sound that escaped Jonathan was not a word. It was something more primal and more devastating. The noise a structure makes when its foundation cracks. Low, involuntary, breaking something load-bearing that can never be entirely repaired. That is not possible, he managed. His voice was barely audible even through the microphone. It is biology, Jonathan. It is very possible. It happened the night before I found Vivian's earring on our bathroom counter. The night you told me you loved me more than anything in the world. Remember that night, because the first do. I remember every word. And then I remember the morning after, when everything those words meant turned to nothing. From the front pew, Margaret Edwards made a sound. Not a gasp, not a sob, something between the two. Her hand moved to her mouth and stayed there, pressing hard against her lips as if trying to hold something inside her chest that was fighting to break free. Vivian stepped forward. Her composure was cracking now, fissures spreading through her carefully maintained exterior like hairline fractures in porcelain. This is absurd, she said. Her voice was tight and controlled, vibrating with the effort of maintaining authority in a situation where authority had become meaningless. You cannot just walk in here and what? Pamela interrupted. She turned to face Vivian fully, not with anger, not with jealousy, with the detached clarity of someone stating facts in a deposition. Tell the truth. Present facts. I am not here to create a scene, Vivian. I am here because your fiancé is still, legally my husband, and he has a child he has never met. Those are not accusations. They are realities. What you do with them is your business. Vivian's eyes flickered to Jonathan, searching for denial, for reassurance, for the confident dismissal she had clearly expected, the kind of smooth, authoritative response he gave in boardrooms when someone challenged his position. But Jonathan was not looking at Vivian. He was staring at the diaper in Pamela's hand like it contained the answer to a question he had been terrified to ask for longer than he would ever admit. A son, he whispered. Gabriel, Pamela repeated. 4 months old. Born February 12th at 3:47 in the morning. 7 pounds, 6 ounces. He smiled for the first time 3 weeks ago. He sleeps through the night, which is more than I can say for myself. Her voice cracked on that last sentence. The first fracture in the armor she had spent 14 months forging. A single hairline fissure that revealed the exhaustion beneath the composure. The sleepless nights, the solo feedings at 2 in the morning, the weight of carrying a secret that grew heavier with every passing day. She sealed it immediately, pressed her lips together, straightened her spine, refused to give this room, this man, this moment, the satisfaction of her tears. Why did you not tell me? Jonathan's voice was raw now, stripped of its boardroom authority, stripped of everything except the naked bewilderment of a man confronting a reality he cannot negotiate his way out of. Because the last thing you said to me was that I could not understand your world, Pamela replied. Her words landed like stones dropped from a height, each one precise, each one heavy, each one aimed at the exact spot where his certainty used to live. I decided you did not need to understand mine. The silence that followed was suffocating. 300 guests watching two people dismantle a lie in real time. The officiant had retreated 2 steps from the altar, his Bible still pressed to his chest, clearly debating whether this fell under the category of situations his seminary training had prepared him for. It did not. Pamela placed the manila envelope on the altar rail. The diaper she set beside it. 2 objects side by side, representing the full spectrum of what Jonathan Edwards had failed to handle. The ending he refused to sign, and the beginning he never showed up for. Sign the papers, Pamela said. Then, if you want to know your son, if you want to be part of his life, you can contact my attorney. We will establish terms, supervised visitation, no exceptions, no shortcuts, no delegating fatherhood to nannies or assistants. You show up yourself, or you do not show up at all. Pamela, please. I am not finished. Her voice held the quiet authority of someone who had learned to command rooms not through volume, but through the undeniable weight of earned conviction. She had built a company, raised a child alone, survived heartbreak that would have flattened most people. She had earned the right to hold this floor for as long as she needed. "I did not come here to humiliate you," she continued. "I came here because 11 months of legal channels failed, and my son deserves a resolved situation, not a limbo. You owe me a signature. You owe him a choice, to be present or to be honest about your absence. That is all I am asking." Jonathan reached for the envelope. His hands trembled visibly. 300 witnesses watched him open it, watched him read the words his attorneys had deflected and delayed and returned with fabricated objections for nearly a year, watched him pull a pen from his inside jacket pocket. It was a Mont Blanc, black and silver, engraved with his initials. Pamela recognized it instantly because she had given it to him on their first anniversary. She remembered the card she had written, "For signing the things that matter." The observation cut deeper than she had prepared for, that he was still carrying the pen she gave him, that he was about to use it to end what she had once believed would last forever. He signed each page, each line, each place marked with a yellow adhesive tab. His signature, once so confident on billion-dollar contracts and acquisition agreements, now shaky and uncertain on the document that officially ended a marriage he had already destroyed in every way that mattered long before the ink dried. When he finished, he looked up at her, and his eyes held something she had not seen in them since their earliest days together. Before the money mattered, before the world got loud, before Vivian Hale walked into their lives and everything that was real became expendable, unguarded, devastating. Honesty. "I want to know him," Jonathan said. "Gabriel, I want to know my son." "Then earn it," Pamela replied. "Not with money, not with gestures, with time, with consistency, with the kind of commitment you could not give me." She took the signed papers, slid them back into the envelope, tucked the diaper into the bag on her shoulder. Then she turned and walked back up the aisle, past 300 faces frozen in various configurations of shock, past the string quartet who had abandoned all pretense of performing, past board members and investors and society columnists who were already composing the headlines in their heads. As she passed the front row, a hand reached out and caught her wrist, gently, not trying to stop her, trying to hold on. Margaret Edwards looked up at Pamela with eyes that were swimming. Her voice was barely a whisper. "The baby. Is he? Does he?" "He is beautiful," Pamela said softly. And for the first time since she had entered the cathedral, her voice carried warmth instead of armor. "He looks like your son. The good parts." She freed her wrist gently and continued walking, through those 300-pound doors, into the spring sunlight that hit her face like absolution, down the cathedral steps where limousines waited in a row like sleeping promises no one was going to keep. 3 blocks away, Dorothy was sitting in the passenger seat of the rental car. Gabriel had woken up and was making the soft, curious sounds of an infant, discovering that the world contained noises beyond his mother's heartbeat. "It is done?" Dorothy asked. Not really a question. She could see it on Pamela's face, the particular expression of someone who has just set down something impossibly heavy. "It is done," Pamela confirmed. She opened the rear door, unbuckled Gabriel from his car seat, lifted him against her chest, and breathed him in. Baby shampoo and clean skin, and the warm particular scent that belonged only to him. The only reality that mattered. And, Dorothy pressed gently, "And now we wait. If he shows up, he shows up. If he does not, Gabriel still has everything he needs." "And what about you? What do you need?" Pamela looked down at her son. He was gripping her finger with the fierce determination of someone who had decided at 4 months old that he was never letting go. His dark eyes, Jonathan's eyes, watched her face with the unfocused intensity of a baby who did not yet understand expressions, but somehow understood everything. "I need to go home," she said. "I need to finish the fall collection. I need to feed this child and read him stories and build him a life so full of love that absence becomes irrelevant." She buckled Gabriel back in, started the engine, and pulled away from the cathedral without looking in the rearview mirror. Behind her, the spire grew smaller, and with it, the version of herself that had once needed Jonathan Edwards to feel complete. That woman was gone. In her place was someone forged from abandonment and midnight feedings, from rejection letters and runway triumphs, from the terrifying, magnificent work of becoming whole without anyone's permission. Now, to understand why Pamela walked into that cathedral, you need to understand why she once ran from one. You need to go back 2.5 years before that spring afternoon to a charity art auction in Manhattan, where a woman who could not afford the event she was standing next to met a man who could afford everything except the one thing he actually needed. The auction was held at the Whitmore Gallery on the Upper East Side, one of those cavernous spaces with white walls and polished concrete floors that made everything inside it look like it cost more than it should, which, to be fair, it did. The art on the walls carried price tags that could fund small school systems. The champagne was French and flowing. The guests were the kind of people whose net worth was discussed in financial publications and whose personal lives were discussed everywhere else. Pamela was not at the auction. She was next to it. In a converted storage room, the gallery had offered her as part of an emerging designer's showcase, a pop-up exhibition where young fashion talents could display their work to the overflow crowd. The room was small. The lighting was mediocre. The foot traffic was mostly people looking for the bathroom, but Pamela had hung her pieces like they were in the Met. 12 garments from her debut capsule collection displayed on mannequins she had borrowed from a friend's boutique in Brooklyn. Each piece was handmade. Each piece told a story through its construction. She worked in architectural silhouettes, clean lines with unexpected details, structural elegance that looked simple from a distance and revealed its complexity up close. She was 29 years old. She had been working toward this moment for 7 years, 3 years of fashion school, 2 years of apprenticing under designers who paid her barely enough to cover her subway fare, 2 more years of building her own label from her apartment, selling through a website she coded herself, and a single consignment relationship with a boutique in Williamsburg. She believed in what she was making. She believed in it the way people believe in things that keep them alive. She was adjusting the collar on a structured blazer when she heard footsteps behind her, not the hesitant shuffle of someone looking for the restroom. Purposeful steps, the kind made by shoes that cost more than her monthly rent. She turned and saw Jonathan Edwards for the first time. He was 35, tall, dark hair that was just beginning to show the earliest suggestion of silver at the temples. A face that was handsome in the specific way that wealthy men are handsome, which is to say well-maintained but not entirely natural. He wore a navy suit that fit him like it had been built on his body, which it had. And he had the particular aura of someone who was accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. But there was something else, something beneath the polish and the tailoring and the quiet authority, a loneliness. It lived in his eyes, in the slight tension at the corners of his mouth, in the way he stood slightly apart from his own presence, as if the persona and the person inside it were not entirely aligned. Most people did not notice this. Most people saw the suit and the watch and the jaw and stopped looking. Pamela noticed it immediately. He was examining one of her jackets, a cropped blazer in charcoal wool with an asymmetrical closure and hidden structural boning that gave it a shape she had spent 3 weeks perfecting. He was not just looking at it. He was studying it, running his fingers along the seam with the focused attention of someone who understood craftsmanship. "The stitching on this closure," he said without looking up. "Is this a blind hem technique?" "It is a modified blind hem," Pamela replied. She walked closer, surprised and slightly suspicious that a man in a $12,000 suit knew anything about stitching techniques. "I reinforced it with an interior welt seam so the closure holds its shape under movement. Most blind hems lose tension over time. This one will not." He looked up at her, and something shifted between them. Not attraction, not yet. Something more fundamental. Recognition. A look two people exchange when they realize the other person sees the world with the same level of attention they do. "How do you know about blind hem techniques?" Pamela asked. "My grandmother was a seamstress," Jonathan replied. "She made all her own clothes until she was 84. I used to sit in her sewing room and watch her work. She talked about fabric the way some people talk about music, like it had a language." "It does," Pamela said, and for the first time that evening, she smiled. "Clothing is the first story you tell the world about yourself before you speak a single word. That is not superficial. That is power." Jonathan studied her face, not the way men usually studied her, which was with the quick appraising glance that calculated attractiveness and dismissed everything else. He looked at her the way he had looked at her jacket, with attention, with genuine curiosity, with the particular interest of someone who had just discovered something unexpected and wanted to understand it. You designed all of these?" he asked, gesturing at the 12 garments. "Every piece, from sketch to pattern to construction. And you are showing them in a converted storage room next to a bathroom." "It is not next to the bathroom. It is adjacent to the bathroom. There is a meaningful difference." He laughed. An actual laugh, not the polished chuckle he deployed at fundraisers and board dinners. A real sound that came from somewhere unguarded. Pamela liked the sound. She was annoyed at herself for liking it. He bought 3 pieces from her collection that night, and he overpaid, deliberately, by an amount that was impossible to mistake for a rounding error. "That jacket is $400, Pamela said, looking at the number he had written on the order form. "Not 4,000. Consider the rest an investment in someone who clearly knows where she is going. I do not need your investment. I need customers who pay fair prices and come back for more. Then I will pay the fair price and come back for more. But I am keeping the investment number on the form. Consider it an unrequested donation to the arts." She should have been flattered. Most emerging designers would have been. But Pamela had spent her entire adult life watching wealthy people use money as a substitute for genuine engagement, buying their way into feeling generous without doing the actual work of caring. She had no interest in being someone's philanthropy project. "If you want to support my work," she said, taking the order form and crossing out his inflated number with a deliberate pen stroke, "then wear the jacket. Wear it somewhere people will see it. Tell them where you got it. That is worth more than the extra $3,600. Jonathan looked at the corrected form, then at Pamela, then back at the form. "Fair enough," he said. "Then can I at least take you to dinner to discuss my new role as your unpaid brand ambassador?" No, I do not know you. You could be anyone. For all I know, you are the kind of man who overpays for things to make himself feel important and calls it generosity." The directness caught him off guard. Pamela could see it register on his face. The micro-expression of someone who was not accustomed to being challenged and was not entirely sure whether he enjoyed it or resented it. He chose to enjoy it. "My name is Jonathan Edwards. I run a company called Edwards Capital. I am not trying to feel important. I am trying to have dinner with someone who just told me clothing is a language. That is the most interesting thing anyone has said to me in approximately 2 years. And I am including the keynote speaker at Davos." Pamela wanted to say no again. On principle. Because men who looked like this and talked like this and wore watches that cost more than her entire inventory were precisely the kind of complication she had spent her 20s avoiding. But there was something in his eyes, that loneliness she had noticed earlier. It had not gone away. If anything, it had deepened during their conversation, as if the act of connecting with someone real had made the contrast with his usual interactions more painful. "One dinner," she said, "and you are paying the fair market price. For the dinner or the jacket. Both." He smiled, and something inside Pamela shifted. Not fell, not collapsed. Shifted. Like a door she had not known was closed had been nudged, just slightly, open. They had dinner 3 nights later at a restaurant she chose, not the kind of place he was used to. No prix-fixe menu, no sommelier. A family-owned Italian restaurant in Carroll Gardens where the owner knew Pamela by name and the bread was warm and the wine was honest. Jonathan showed up in one of her jackets, the charcoal blazer with the asymmetrical closure. He wore it over a simple white shirt and dark jeans, and he looked nothing like the man she had met at the gallery. He looked like someone trying to be seen as himself rather than as his net worth. They talked for 4 hours, about fabric and architecture and the difference between building something for profit and building something because it needs to exist, about his grandmother's sewing room and Pamela's fashion school thesis on the relationship between garment construction and emotional identity, about the pressure of being publicly successful and privately uncertain, about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who want things from you, and the particular hunger that comes from never being sure if anyone wants you. He was intelligent, genuinely deeply intelligent, not just business smart, but curious about the world in ways that surprised her. He asked questions that no one had ever asked her about her work, not how much revenue she projected or what her growth strategy was, but why she chose certain fabrics, what she was trying to make people feel when they put on her clothes, what it meant to her to create something with her hands. And Pamela, who had spent years building walls so high she had forgotten what the view looked like from the other side, found herself answering honestly. "I want people to feel armored," she said. "Not in the military sense, in the emotional sense. I want a woman to put on one of my jackets and feel like she can walk into any room in the world and belong there. Not because of the label, because of the construction, because the garment is built so well that it holds her up even when she cannot hold herself. Jonathan was quiet for a moment, looking at her across the table with an expression she could not quite categorize. That is what you do, he said. You build things that hold people up. I try. What holds you up? The question caught her unprepared. She took a sip of wine to buy herself a moment. Stubbornness mostly, she said, and the irrational belief that if I work hard enough, I can make something beautiful enough that it justifies the struggle. That is not irrational, Jonathan said. That is the most rational thing I have heard in years. He walked her home that night. They stood outside her apartment building in Brooklyn, a walk-up with a broken intercom and a neighbor who played saxophone badly at midnight. It was about as far from his penthouse world as geography and tax brackets could produce. He did not try to kiss her. He stood 3 feet away, hands in the pockets of her jacket, and he said something she would remember for as long as she lived. I have spent 10 years building a company that makes money. You have spent 7 years building a company that makes meaning. I think you are the more successful one. I just have better margins. She laughed, and the door that had nudged open at the gallery swung a little wider. He called the next day, and the day after that, not to pursue her, to continue the conversation, as if the 4 hours at dinner had been an interruption of something longer, something that had been waiting for both of them to be ready. The courtship unfolded over the next 3 months. He showed up at her Brooklyn studio with takeout. She refused his offer to fund her line. I want to build this myself, she told him. If you want to be part of my life, be part of my life. Not my business plan. He showed up to her first trunk show at a boutique in Soho and stood in the back watching her interact with buyers, his face carrying an expression she would later identify as pride. She met his world gradually and found most of it hollow. The fundraisers where nobody listened to anyone. The dinners where every conversation was a negotiation wearing a social mask. The relentless performance of wealth that substituted for actual living. But she also met his mother, Margaret, who was warm and direct, and immediately liked Pamela for the same reason Jonathan did. She does not pretend, Margaret told her son after the first meeting. Hold on to that. People who do not pretend are the rarest thing in the world. 6 months in, Jonathan proposed. Not at a fancy restaurant, not on a private yacht, in Pamela's studio, surrounded by fabric swatches and half-finished designs and the organized chaos of a creative mind at work. This is where you are most yourself, he said, kneeling on a floor dusted with thread clippings. And I want to be part of that. I want to be part of everything you are. Not the version of you that shows up at galas. The version that stays up until 3 in the morning because a seam is not right. That version. The real one. Will you marry me? She said yes. And for a brief, shining, impossible window of time, everything was exactly as it should be. They were married on the coast of Maine in September. A small ceremony. 40 guests. Wildflowers instead of formal arrangements. A stone chapel overlooking the Atlantic where the sound of waves competed with the officiant's words and somehow made them feel more honest. Pamela wore a dress she designed herself. Ivory silk with architectural lines and a simplicity that made every other wedding gown in history look like it was trying too hard. No beading, no embroidery, no excess. Just perfect construction and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to apologize for it. Jonathan cried when he saw her walking toward him. Not the single cinematic tear that men produce in movies. Real crying. The kind that makes your nose run and your shoulders shake and forces you to borrow a handkerchief from your best man because you forgot to put one in your own pocket. They wrote their own vows. Jonathan went first. I have spent my entire adult life building things that generate profit, he said. Towers and portfolios and quarterly projections. And I was good at it. I was very good at it. But I never built anything that made me feel like I was home until I met you. You are the first thing in my life that is not a transaction. You are the first person who wanted me without wanting something from me. And I promise you, for the rest of my life, I will be worthy of that. I will show up, not as a CEO, not as a brand, as a man, your man, every single day. Pamela's vows were shorter, because Pamela believed in economy of language the same way she believed in economy of design. Every word should earn its place or be cut. I do not need you, she said. And Jonathan laughed through his tears because only Pamela would start her wedding vows with that sentence. I do not need you to complete me or save me or give my life meaning. My life has meaning. My work has meaning. I am whole. But I choose you, not because I need to, because you make the wholeness better. You make me want to build bigger, dream louder, risk more. I choose you, Jonathan, today and every day after, not because I have to, because I want to, and wanting is braver than needing. Every single time, the officiant was crying. Margaret was crying. Even the waves seemed to pause for a moment, as if the ocean itself recognized that something important had just been promised. They honeymooned in Portugal. 2 weeks of cobblestone streets and cheap wine and mornings where they did not get out of bed until noon because the world outside could wait and the world between them could not. Jonathan left his phone in the hotel safe for the first 3 days. Pamela sketched designs on napkins at seaside restaurants, while Jonathan watched her with the expression of a man who could not quite believe his luck. It was the happiest either of them had ever been. And like all peaks, it existed primarily to establish the height from which the fall would hurt the most. They moved into Jonathan's penthouse overlooking the Pacific. He told her to redecorate completely. Make it ours, he said. Not mine. Ours. She did. Replacing the sterile minimalism his interior designer had installed with warmth and texture and the kind of lived-in beauty that made a house feel like someone actually inhabited it rather than just displayed it. Sunday mornings became their ritual. Coffee in bed. The newspaper spread between them. Jonathan reading the financial section while Pamela sketched beside him, her pencil moving in quick, confident strokes across paper propped against her knees. Sometimes he would look over at her work and ask questions. What is that going to be? What does that line do? Why did you choose that shape? And she would explain and he would listen, and the morning would stretch into afternoon without either of them noticing. He played piano in the evenings, a baby grand that had come with the penthouse and that his interior designer had selected purely for aesthetic purposes. No one was supposed to actually play it, but Jonathan could play. Not brilliantly, not with the technical precision of someone who had studied seriously, but with the loose, joyful imperfection of someone who played because it made him happy rather than because it made him impressive. He would sit at the bench barefoot after dinner, still in his work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, playing whatever came into his fingers. Bach sometimes, jazz standards other times, occasionally something he was making up as he went along, which Pamela secretly loved most because it meant he was relaxed enough to be bad at something in front of her. She would work at her drafting table across the room, listening to him play while she pinned fabric and adjusted patterns. And sometimes she would look up and watch him and think, this is what people mean when they talk about happiness. Not the dramatic, cinematic version. The quiet kind. The kind that exists in ordinary Tuesday evenings when nothing special is happening, and that is precisely what makes it special. Her fashion label was growing. Pamela Designs had secured placement in 3 boutiques and was generating enough revenue to hire her first 2 employees. She insisted on building it independently. Jonathan offered financial backing exactly once. She turned him down with the directness he had learned to expect from her. I love you, she said, but if I build this with your money, it will always be your money. I need it to be mine. I need to know I can do this on my own, so that if everything else falls apart, I have something that belongs to me completely. He respected it, or at least he said he did. Looking back, Pamela would wonder if her insistence on independence had made him feel unnecessary, if her refusal to need him had planted a seed of insecurity that grew in silence while she was too busy building to notice. They talked about children. Someday, when the timing is right, when Pamela's label was more established, when Jonathan's expansion into Asian markets was complete, someday became their favorite word, a container for all the things they wanted but were not quite ready to hold. The cracks began so quietly that Pamela almost missed them. A phone buzzing at dinner. Just work, Jonathan would say, flipping it face down on the table, but his eyes would linger on the screen a half-second longer than they used to. A half-second that contained something she could not name. Late nights at the office that stretched later and later, the kind of late that stops being about productivity and starts being about avoidance. She would be asleep when he came home, would feel the mattress shift when he climbed in, would reach for him in the dark and find his back turned, not aggressively, not with hostility, just turned. A small rotation of the body that meant everything and nothing simultaneously. A charity gala where Pamela noticed how many women orbited Jonathan. Not just admired, orbited, moving in deliberate circles around him like planets around a sun. She had always known he was attractive, had always known other women saw what she saw, but there was something different about the way one particular woman moved through his space. Not orbiting, approaching, with the confidence of someone who had been given permission to be close. Vivian Hale, pharmaceutical heiress, tall and angular with cheekbones that looked engineered rather than inherited. She touched Jonathan's arm when she spoke to him. Not casually, specifically, with the precise pressure of someone marking territory. "Who is that?" Pamela asked in the car on the way home. Vivian Hale, business contact, pharmaceutical sector. Her family's company is exploring a partnership with Edwards Capital. Nothing you need to worry about. I am not worried. I am asking, and I am answering. She is a business contact. That is all. He said it with a clean, clipped delivery of someone who had rehearsed the sentence. Pamela filed it away, not as evidence, not yet, as a question mark, a small notation in the margin of their marriage that said, "Revisit this later." She did not revisit it. She was too busy. The fall collection was consuming every waking hour. Orders were increasing. She was negotiating her first international stockist. The work was demanding and exhilarating, and left very little room for the kind of vigilance that might have caught what was happening beneath the surface of her marriage. There were other signs, small ones. A new cologne she did not recognize on his collar when she hugged him at the door. He had always worn the same scent. Vetiver and cedar, something his grandmother had chosen for him years ago. This was different, lighter, more floral, not his. She asked about it once, casually, while they were brushing their teeth side by side in the bathroom, their nightly ritual, the domestic intimacy of two people sharing a sink. "New cologne," she observed. "A sample. Someone gave it to me at the office. I thought I would try it." "It is not you." He rinsed his toothbrush, placed it in the holder, met her eyes in the mirror. "I will go back to the old one," he said. And he did. The next day, the vetiver and cedar returned, but Pamela could not unsmell the other scent, could not unfeel the wrongness of it, like a single note played in the wrong key, technically subtle, emotionally deafening. The withdrawal accelerated, not physical intimacy. They still reached for each other in the dark, still connected in the way that bodies do when the heart is not yet ready to admit what the mind already suspects. But emotional intimacy, the small daily gestures that make a marriage feel inhabited, those began to disappear. He stopped asking about her designs, stopped looking over at her sketchbook on Sunday mornings, stopped playing piano in the evenings because he was never home in the evenings anymore. The bench sat empty, gathering the particular kind of dust that accumulates on things that have been abandoned. She tried to talk to him about it. Twice. The first time, over dinner at the Italian restaurant in Carroll Gardens where they had had their first date. She chose it deliberately, a geographical reminder of who they had been. But Jonathan was distracted, checking his phone under the table, giving her answers that were technically responsive but emotionally vacant, like talking to a very sophisticated chatbot that had been programmed with his vocabulary but not his heart. "You feel far away," she said. "I am right here, physically. But something is different. Something has changed and I cannot figure out what it is." "Nothing has changed, Pamela. Work is intense right now. The Asian expansion is complicated. I am tired. That is all." The second time was worse. A Sunday morning, their morning, she was sketching. He was reading. But the quality of the silence between them had shifted. It used to be comfortable, warm, the kind of quiet that two people share when they do not need words to feel connected. Now it was hollow, echoey, the kind of silence that exists in rooms where something important used to live but does not anymore. "Talk to me," she said. "Tell me what is happening." "Nothing is happening. You are being paranoid." Paranoid. The word landed like a slap disguised as a diagnosis, reducing her legitimate concern to pathology, making her the problem for noticing that there was a problem. She stopped asking after that, not because the questions went away, but because asking and being dismissed was worse than not asking at all. The earring changed everything. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. October light coming through the bathroom windows at an angle that made everything look golden and temporary. Pamela was getting ready for a meeting with a potential investor. She reached for her makeup bag on the bathroom counter, and her hand brushed something small and hard and wrong. A diamond stud. Delicate. Expensive. The kind of earring that comes in a velvet box from a jeweler who knows your name. It sat on the white marble counter, like a period at the end of a sentence she had been trying not to read. Pamela wore pearls. She had always worn pearls. Simple round studs that her mother had given her when she graduated from fashion school. She had never owned a diamond earring in her life. She picked it up, held it between her thumb and forefinger, turned it slowly, watching the light catch the facets, each tiny flash of brilliance illuminating a truth she had spent months trying not to see. She set the earring down, sat on the edge of the bathtub, and thought very carefully about what she wanted to do next. She did not cry. She would cry later. For days, for weeks, in her childhood bedroom in Vermont, while a baby grew inside her, and the world she had built burned behind her. But not now. Now she was too angry to cry, and beneath the anger, too certain, because the earring was not a surprise. It was a confirmation, the final piece of evidence in a case she had been building unconsciously for months. Every late night, every turn back, every flipped phone and defensive answer and hollow Sunday silence. All of it added up to this. A diamond stud on a bathroom counter. A verdict delivered without a trial. She went to her meeting, performed her pitch with the mechanical precision of someone operating on autopilot, got the investment, drove home, and waited. Jonathan arrived at 8:15. He walked in the door carrying his briefcase in the particular exhaustion of a man who had been performing all day and was ready to stop. He set his keys on the entry table, hung his coat, walked into the kitchen, and stopped, because Pamela was sitting at the kitchen island, still in her meeting clothes, the diamond earring placed precisely in the center of the counter between them. Small and brilliant and devastating. The silence lasted 11 seconds. Pamela counted. 11 seconds during which Jonathan looked at the earring and then at her and then at the earring again, and she watched the calculations happen behind his eyes. The rapid assessment of possible explanations, the weighing of lies against confessions, the cost-benefit analysis of truth versus survival. In those 11 seconds, Pamela saw something she would never forget. She saw the moment he decided not to fight for her, the moment the calculation completed, and the result was not denial or devastation or desperate apology. The result was resignation, as if he had known this moment was coming and had already made his peace with it. "Whose is it?" Pamela said. Her voice was level, controlled, the voice of a woman who had decided she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Jonathan did not sit down. He stood on the opposite side of the island, the earring between them like a border neither of them would cross. "Vivian," he said. One word, her name, dropped into the kitchen like a stone into still water, creating ripples that would not stop spreading for years. "How long?" Pamela asked. 3 months. 3 months. She processed this. 3 months of lies occupying the same space as their marriage. 3 months of coming home to her after being with someone else. 3 months of Sunday mornings in shared sinks, and the fundamental violation of reading the newspaper beside someone whose entire presence was a deception. Why? Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something that was not quite remorse and not quite explanation. Something worse. Rationalization. It just happened. I did not plan it. She understands my world in ways you cannot. In ways you cannot. 4 words. 11 syllables. The entirety of their marriage reduced to a deficiency. Not something he had done wrong. Something she had failed to be. She could not understand his world. She with her self-built company and her handmade garments and her refusal to need his money or his name or anything except his honesty and his presence. She was insufficient, not because she lacked something, but because she was herself. And herself apparently was not enough for a man who needed to be understood by someone who spoke the language of old money and pharmaceutical dynasties and the comfortable emptiness of a life where nothing was ever challenged and nothing ever changed. Pamela stood up. She did not throw the earring, did not sweep it off the counter in a dramatic gesture. She left it exactly where it was, a monument to what had been broken in this kitchen on this Tuesday in October. "I am leaving," she said. "Pamela, we can talk about this. You just told me another woman understands your world better than your wife. There is nothing left to talk about." She walked upstairs, packed 2 suitcases, took only what was hers, the clothes she had designed, the jewelry her mother had given her, the sketchbooks that contained every idea she had ever had. She left behind everything he had bought her, every gift, every piece of their shared life that carried his fingerprints. She came back downstairs. He had not moved. He was still standing in the kitchen. The earring still sat on the counter. The whole scene looked like a photograph of a crime that had not been prosecuted yet. She walked past him, through the living room where they used to dance, past the piano bench where he used to play barefoot and laugh at his mistakes. Through the front door of the home, she had turned from a showroom into a sanctuary. She put her suitcases in the car, started the engine, and drove. Midnight. 2 suitcases, a highway stretching north through darkness, the rearview mirror showing the skyline she was leaving behind, the windshield showing nothing but road and the terrifying freedom of having nothing left to lose. She drove to Vermont, to Dorothy's house, the same house where she had grown up, the same bedroom where she had dreamed of becoming a designer, the same bathroom where 3 weeks later she would kneel on the floor and watch 2 pink lines appear on a pregnancy test and understand that the universe had a savage, merciless, extraordinary sense of timing. She filed for divorce the following week. The papers were straightforward. No contest, no dispute over assets. She wanted nothing from him except the legal dissolution of a promise he had already broken. The papers were sent to Jonathan's attorneys. They were returned. Procedural errors, the response said. Specific language inconsistencies that required revision and resubmission. Pamela's lawyer reviewed the so-called errors. They were fabricated, invented obstacles designed to delay a process that Jonathan apparently was not ready to finalize. She revised and resubmitted. The papers were returned again. Different fabricated errors, a different set of imaginary obstacles. It became clear that Jonathan was not contesting the divorce. He was ignoring it, refusing to engage, as if not signing meant the marriage was not over, as if keeping the legal framework intact could somehow preserve something he had already demolished. Pamela stopped trying for a while. She had more immediate concerns. Specifically, the fact that she was pregnant with the child of a man who had chosen someone else. A child conceived on the last night she had believed her marriage was real. The last night before the earring. Before the 4 words. Before the highway and the darkness and the 2 suitcases and the complete dismantling of every plan she had ever made. I need to pause here and speak directly to you. Because what Pamela did next is the part of this story that matters most, not the betrayal. Betrayal is common, ordinary. It happens in penthouses and apartments and suburbs every single day. What is not common is what a person does after. The choice they make when the ground beneath them has disappeared and there is nothing below but free fall, and the terrifying question of whether they will find something to grab onto or just keep falling forever. If you are watching this, and you are in your own free fall right now, if someone broke something you thought was unbreakable, and you are trying to figure out how to survive it, stay with me, because what Pamela built from the rubble of what Jonathan destroyed is proof that devastation is not a destination. It is a departure point. It is the place where the best version of your life begins if you are brave enough and stubborn enough and angry enough to build it. Hit that like button if you believe that. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Mr. Dawson's Stories because what happens next is the kind of transformation that does not just change one life. It changes every life it touches. Now, let me tell you about the night Gabriel was born, and the empire Pamela built while the world was not watching. The pregnancy was difficult, not medically. Medically, everything progressed normally. But emotionally, it was warfare. Because Pamela was growing a child who was half Jonathan inside a body that was trying to forget Jonathan existed. Every kick was a reminder. Every ultrasound showed a face that would inevitably carry pieces of the man who had told her she could not understand his world. Every midnight craving sent her to a kitchen that was not her kitchen and a house that was not her house, eating food she had not bought with money she was running out of. Dorothy was steady, present, offering support without smothering, making meals without being asked, leaving tissues on the nightstand without comment, knowing when to speak and when to simply be in the room. "Are you going to tell him?" Dorothy asked once, early in the pregnancy, when the morning sickness was still relentless and the future was still formless. No, he has a right to know. He had a right to be faithful. Rights are conditional on behavior. That child is not conditional, Dorothy said carefully. That child is a person who will someday want to know where half of them came from. Someday, Pamela replied. Not today. Dorothy studied her daughter for a long moment. 30 years of motherhood had taught her when to push and when to yield. This was a yielding moment. "If you are sure," she said, "I will support you. But remember, secrets have weight. The longer you carry them, the heavier they get." "Then I will get stronger," Pamela replied. And she did. She turned Dorothy's dining room table into a command center. Laptop on one end, fabric samples on the other, sketchbooks stacked between. She worked 12-hour days through her second trimester, designing, sourcing, building relationships with buyers and boutique owners through emails and video calls, and the sheer relentless force of a woman who had decided that failure was not something she could afford. Pamela Designs had a small but loyal customer base from the Brooklyn days. She leaned into it, launched a new collection online, handled every aspect of the business herself: photography, marketing, customer service, order fulfillment. She packed boxes at midnight with swollen ankles and a baby pressing against her ribs like it was already impatient with the world. A boutique in Burlington placed an order for 20 pieces. Pamela fulfilled it in 3 weeks, hand sewing late into the night because she could not afford a production assistant yet. The pieces sold out in 9 days. The boutique doubled their next order. A regional fashion magazine ran a small feature on her work. The journalist had found her through Instagram. The headline read, "Building Beauty from Scratch." The article mentioned nothing about Jonathan or the marriage, or the reason a talented designer had suddenly relocated from a Manhattan penthouse to a farmhouse in Vermont. Pamela had made sure of that. The orders increased. A store in Boston, another in Portland, a high-end online retailer that catered to professional women who wanted clothes that were as serious as they were. By her third trimester, she had enough revenue to hire her first employee, a young woman named Rosalie, who handled shipping and customer inquiries with a kind of cheerful efficiency that allowed Pamela to focus entirely on design. She was building something, not just a business, a life, a foundation that could not be taken from her because it depended on nothing and no one except her own talent and determination. Gabriel was born on February 12th at 3:47 in the morning, a freezing Vermont night, the kind of cold that makes the world feel contracted and essential, like the universe has shrunk to the size of what matters. Dorothy drove her to the hospital, held her hand through 12 hours of labor, was the first person besides the medical team to hold Gabriel when he emerged into the world, screaming with the particular outrage of someone who had been comfortable where he was and did not appreciate the disruption. 7 pounds, 6 ounces, dark hair, and Jonathan's eyes. That last detail was the only moment Pamela cried during the delivery, not from pain, not from exhaustion, from the specific grief of seeing the man she had loved looking back at her from the face of the child she had made alone. "Hello, Gabriel," she whispered. Her voice was raw from labor and something deeper than labor. "I am your mother, and I am going to give you everything." She took him home to Dorothy's house, set up a bassinet in her bedroom, and continued working, because the world does not pause for heartbreak or childbirth or the complicated intersection of both. The next 4 months were a blur of midnight feedings and morning meetings, of spit up on fabric samples and conference calls conducted while bouncing a baby on her hip, of exhaustion so profound it became its own kind of energy, a buzzing, relentless frequency that kept her moving forward, because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant remembering, and remembering meant drowning. She expanded, methodically, strategically, with the discipline of someone who understood that empires are not built on emotion. They are built on systems. She hired more staff, opened her first standalone boutique, developed a brand identity that resonated with women who had been told they could not have both ambition and authenticity. Pamela Designs became known for clothes that made women feel powerful without sacrificing beauty. Structural garments with clean lines and hidden details that only the wearer knew about. Secret pockets, reinforced seams, the kind of construction that said, "I was built to last and I do not need your approval." By Gabriel's 4th month, she had boutiques in 4 cities, 32 employees, revenue that had quadrupled in a single year, and a net worth that had crossed the threshold from surviving to thriving without anyone's help. She also launched the Foundation, a nonprofit providing childcare, mentorship, and small business loans to single parents building careers while raising children alone, because she knew from personal experience that the hardest part of doing everything alone was not the doing. It was the alone. She was invited to speak at conferences, featured in industry publications, profiled by journalists who wanted to tell the story of a woman who had built a fashion empire from a dining room table in rural Vermont with a newborn in her arms. She told them everything except the part about Jonathan. That story belonged to her, and she was not ready to share it. And then one night, scrolling through her phone at 2 a.m. while Gabriel nursed, she saw the headline that changed everything. Edwards Capital CEO Jonathan Edwards to wed pharmaceutical heiress Vivian Hale in spring ceremony. Exclusive details inside. She stopped scrolling. Gabriel continued nursing, oblivious, the blue light of the phone screen illuminating both their faces in the dark bedroom. She read the article. Every word. The engagement had been announced 3 weeks earlier at a private dinner in Manhattan. The wedding was planned for spring, at the Cathedral of the Sacred Heart in Richmond, Virginia. 300 guests. A celebration befitting the union of two of America's most prominent families. The Cathedral of the Sacred Heart. The same cathedral where Pamela had once imagined renewing her vows with Jonathan on their 10th anniversary. A fantasy she had indulged in during the early months of their marriage, when forever still felt like a reasonable expectation. Something detonated in her chest. Not grief. She was past grief. Not jealousy. Jealousy requires wanting what someone else has, and Pamela did not want Jonathan back. What she felt was purer and more dangerous than either of those things. Fury. Clean and clarifying and almost holy in its precision. He was starting over, building a new chapter on the foundation of the one he had demolished, marrying another woman in a cathedral while still legally married to Pamela, because the divorce papers were still unsigned. 11 months of legal attempts and fabricated procedural errors, and a man who could not be bothered to end what he had already destroyed. The audacity of it. The casual arrogance of a man who believed he could simply move forward without resolving what he had left behind, who believed that enough money and enough time and enough deliberate forgetting could erase a wife and a child and an entire chapter of his life as if it had never been written. She set her phone down, looked at Gabriel. His dark eyes were closed now, milk-drunk and sleeping. His small fist curled against her chest, and she made a decision. She would not mail the divorce papers. She would not let the lawyers handle it. She would not be quietly erased from a story she had helped write. She would deliver the papers herself. She would tell Jonathan about his son. She would walk into that cathedral and hand him the two things he had been running from. And then she would walk out, with her dignity, with her truth, with the knowledge that she had refused to be invisible even when invisibility would have been easier. The morning of the wedding, Dorothy found Pamela in the hotel room in Richmond, already dressed. The black Valentino, her hair pulled back, the manila envelope on the bed, the diaper folded beside it. "Last chance," Dorothy said. "You can still change your mind." "I changed my mind 14 months ago," Pamela replied, "when I decided I deserved better than silence. This is just the follow-through." She paused at the mirror, looked at the woman reflected there, 31 years old, a mother, a founder, a millionaire, a woman who had been discarded and had responded by becoming extraordinary. She did not recognize herself, and she was glad. The woman she used to be would not have had the courage to do what she was about to do. This woman did. "Let us go," she said. And they went. Now you know what brought Pamela to those cathedral doors. You know what she carried and why she carried it, and the 14 months of silence that made carrying it necessary. But what you do not know yet is what happened after she walked out. What happened inside that cathedral when the doors closed behind her and 300 guests sat in the wreckage of what they had just witnessed. Because the wedding did not just stop, it detonated. The silence lasted approximately 8 seconds after Pamela exited through those 300-pound doors. 8 seconds of 300 people processing the impossible thing they had just seen. A woman in black walking down the aisle of a wedding, handing the groom a diaper, telling him he had a son, watching him sign divorce papers at the altar, and then walking out without looking back. 8 seconds, and then the cathedral erupted, not into applause, not into organized response, into the particular kind of chaos that happens when reality violates every expectation simultaneously. Whispers became murmurs. Murmurs became conversations. Conversations became the full-throated roar of 300 people who had just watched the social event of the year become the scandal of the decade. Vivian Hale turned to Jonathan with fury that had been waiting beneath her composure like magma beneath a thin crust of stone. "You are still married." Her voice was low and controlled and absolutely terrifying. You have a child you never told me about. I did not know, Jonathan said. His voice sounded like it was coming from very far away, as if the man standing at the altar and the voice emerging from him were no longer entirely connected. I did not know about the baby. I swear to you, I did not know. But you knew about the wife. You knew the divorce was not finalized. You knew you were still legally married when you proposed to me. When we planned this wedding, when we stood in front of these people, you knew. Jonathan had no answer, because there was no answer. She was right. He had known the divorce papers were unsigned, had known his attorneys were fabricating delays, had known on some level that by not signing he was maintaining a connection to Pamela that he was simultaneously trying to sever and preserve. The psychology was complicated. The reality was simple. He had lied by omission, and the omission had just detonated in front of 300 witnesses. Vivian's father stood up from the front pew, a tall man with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent 40 years protecting a pharmaceutical empire from exactly this kind of uncontrolled catastrophe. This wedding is over, he announced. His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He was looking at Jonathan with an expression that contained no anger. Anger would have been personal. This was professional, clinical, the look of a man cutting a liability. Vivian turned and walked back down the aisle, alone, in her $2 million gown, with the cathedral train trailing behind her like a surrender flag. She did not look at anyone, did not acknowledge the guests or the flowers or the $300,000 string quartet that had stopped playing 20 minutes ago. She walked through the doors and into the limousine that was waiting to take her to a reception that would never happen. Her father's publicist released a statement within 3 hours. The engagement between Vivian Hale and Jonathan Edwards has been dissolved by mutual agreement. The families request privacy during this time. No further comment will be made. There was nothing mutual about it. But the Hale family understood optics the way surgeons understand anatomy. Precisely, clinically, without sentiment. Inside the cathedral, the guests began to leave. In clusters, in pairs, alone. Each one carrying the story they had just witnessed out into the world where it would multiply and mutate and become the only thing anyone in their social circle would talk about for months. Someone had live-streamed the confrontation, not the whole thing. Just the part where Pamela held up the diaper and told Jonathan he had a son. 37 seconds of footage that went viral within hours. It was shared 200,000 times before midnight. It was on entertainment news sites by the next morning. By the following week, Pamela had become an involuntary symbol of scorned woman empowerment. A meme, a headline, a cultural moment she had never intended to create and could not control. She was not watching any of it. She was in the car with Dorothy and Gabriel, driving home, feeding her son at a rest stop somewhere in Virginia while the internet turned her private pain into public spectacle. Back in the cathedral, the candles burned down. The flowers wilted. The string quartet packed their instruments and left without being paid. The caterers at the reception venue stood in a fully decorated ballroom waiting for guests who would never arrive. And Jonathan Edwards sat in the front pew, alone, holding the diaper Pamela had left on the altar rail, the smallest, most ordinary object in the world, clean and white and impossibly light, and it weighed more than anything he had ever held. He sat there for a long time, watching the colored light from the stained glass windows move across the marble floor as the afternoon sun shifted. The cathedral was empty now except for him and the echoes of everything that had just happened. He pulled out his phone, called his assistant. "Cancel everything," he said. "Every meeting, every call, everything for the next week. Sir, you have the Shanghai acquisition review on Thursday and the board presentation on." I said everything. He went home to his penthouse. The one Pamela had decorated. The one he had never redecorated after she left because changing it felt like admitting she was gone. Her touches were still everywhere. The throw pillows she had chosen, the art she had hung, the piano bench she had sat beside him on while he played Bach badly, and she laughed at his mistakes and the world outside did not exist. He set the diaper on the coffee table, sat across from it, and stared at it for a very long time. Then he opened his laptop and searched for Pamela Carter. The results were extensive. Pamela designs, the boutiques, the foundation, the interviews, the features, the photographs of a woman who had walked away from him with 2 suitcases and built a life that made his empire look small by comparison. Not in dollars, in meaning. He searched for Gabriel, found nothing. She had protected their son completely. No photographs, no mentions, no digital footprint. The child existed in a world Pamela had built specifically to be impenetrable to the man who had fathered him. Jonathan closed the laptop, looked at the diaper, and for the first time since Pamela had left 14 months ago, he allowed himself to feel what he had been avoiding. He did not drink that night. He wanted to. The scotch was right there on the sideboard, expensive and numbing, and exactly the kind of temporary solution that would allow him to avoid permanent reckoning. But something stopped him. Maybe the diaper on the coffee table, maybe the memory of Pamela's face in the cathedral. Not angry, not vengeful, just done. The expression of someone who has finished waiting for you to become the person they needed and has decided to move forward without you. He sat in the dark for hours, and when the sun came up, he called his mother. We have reached the turning point of this story, and I need to check in with you. Right now, some of you believe Jonathan can change. Some of you think he is going to fail. Some of you have been the Jonathan in someone's story, the one who did not realize what they had until it was signed away on an altar rail. Wherever you stand, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now telling me whether you think people can truly change or whether they just get better at pretending. And while you are down there, make sure you have hit that subscribe button and that notification bell, because the next chapter of this story is going to challenge everything you have decided so far. Now let me tell you about the conversation that changed Jonathan Edwards, and the 6 words his mother said that broke him more completely than any cathedral confrontation ever could. Margaret Edwards arrived at her son's penthouse the next morning at 9. She did not call ahead. She did not ask permission. She walked in with the key Pamela had given her 2 years ago and found Jonathan sitting exactly where he had been sitting 12 hours earlier, in front of the coffee table, staring at a diaper. The penthouse looked the same as it always did. Immaculate, tastefully decorated, every surface polished, every cushion arranged. It looked like a magazine spread for a life that was being displayed rather than lived. Margaret sat across from her son. She did not offer comfort, did not pour tea, did not reach for his hand or soften her expression or do any of the maternal things that mothers do when their children are suffering and the suffering is undeserved. Jonathan's suffering was not undeserved, and Margaret was not a woman who confused love with absolution. "Tell me everything," she said, "from the beginning, and do not lie to me, Jonathan. I just watched a woman I love like a daughter walk into your wedding and tell 300 people that you have a son you have never met. I deserve the truth, all of it." And he told her everything. Vivian, the affair, the earring, the 4 words, Pamela's departure, the unsigned divorce papers, the 14 months of silence during which he had convinced himself that what he could not see did not exist. Margaret listened without interrupting. When he finished, the silence between them was thick enough to suffocate on. Then Margaret spoke, and what she said was worse than anything Pamela had said in the cathedral. Because Pamela had spoken from anger and hurt and the righteous fury of a woman who had been wronged, Margaret spoke from love. And love, when it is honest, cuts deeper than any other blade. "I raised you to be better than this." 6 words. Jonathan felt each one land like a physical impact. "Your father, God rest him, would be ashamed," Margaret continued, "not of the scandal, not of the public embarrassment, of the choice. You had a woman who loved you honestly, completely, without condition. A woman who did not want your money or your name or your connections. She wanted you, the real you. The man who plays piano badly and laughs about it. The man who noticed the stitching on a jacket in a pop-up gallery because his grandmother taught him to appreciate craftsmanship. That man. And you traded her for convenience. You traded her for a woman who never challenged you because she did not care enough to bother. Mom, I am not finished. You have a grandson I have never held. A child who has been in this world for 4 months, and I did not know he existed. Pamela kept him from you, and I understand why. I understand because if you had done to me what you did to her, I would have kept everything from you too. But that child is innocent. He did not choose his father. He did not choose this mess. And he deserves better than to be the consequence of your cowardice." Jonathan said nothing. There was nothing to say. She was right about everything, and they both knew it. "Fix this," Margaret said. "Not for your reputation, not for your company, not for the board or the shareholders or the society pages. Fix this for that child. Show up for him the way you failed to show up for his mother. And if you cannot do that, If you are not willing to do the hard, daily, unglamorous work of being a father, then have the decency to stay away entirely. Because a part-time parent is worse than no parent at all. At least absence is honest. She stood up, picked up her coat. One more thing, she said from the doorway. Pamela built an empire while you were playing house with a woman who let you stay small. Think about that. Think about what it says about her. And think about what it says about you. She left. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam. Jonathan sat in the silence his mother had left behind. The diaper on the coffee table, the piano untouched in the corner, the penthouse full of Pamela's choices, her colors, her textures, her presence preserved in every room like a ghost that refused to leave because it had more right to be there than he did. And for the first time in his adult life, Jonathan Edwards did not know what to do next. He had built a $4.2 billion company from a single investment fund. He had navigated hostile takeovers and market crashes and regulatory investigations with calm precision. He had always known the next move, the next strategy, the next play. But this was not business. This was not a problem that could be solved with capital or leverage or the right attorney. This was a 4-month-old boy sleeping in Vermont who had his eyes and did not know his name. This was a woman who had loved him honestly and been repaid with betrayal. This was the wreckage of every choice he had made since the night he decided that easy was better than meaningful and comfort was worth more than connection. He needed help, not the kind of help his assistant could provide, not legal help or financial help or strategic help. He needed help becoming a different person, because the person he was had created this disaster, and the same person could not fix it. He found a therapist, not through a referral from his concierge or his executive wellness program, through a search engine. Like a normal person, he scrolled through profiles and reviews and credentials and chose someone named Dr. Calloway, whose biography said she specialized in helping high-achieving individuals examine the gap between their public success and their private failures. The gap between public success and private failure. That was his entire life compressed into a single sentence. The first session was brutal. Dr. Calloway did not ease into things. She did not spend 45 minutes building rapport and establishing trust. She sat across from him and said, "Tell me why you are here." And when he told her, she asked the question that would become the foundation of everything that came after. You chose a woman who did not challenge you over a woman who did. Why? Jonathan gave the answer he had prepared. The polished, boardroom-ready version. Vivian understood his world, shared his background, made his life easier. Dr. Calloway waited until he finished. Then she said, "That is the answer you have been telling yourself. Now tell me the real one." It took 3 sessions before he could. "Pamela made me uncomfortable," he finally admitted. Week 3. Sitting in a leather chair in Dr. Calloway's office, his hands clasped between his knees, looking at the floor because he could not look at anyone while he said this. She saw through me. She expected me to grow, and I was terrified of not being able to. Terrified that if I tried to become the man she deserved and failed, she would see me for what I really was. Which is what? Dr. Calloway asked. Small, Jonathan said, and the word cost him everything. He continued therapy. Every week, sometimes twice a week when the work got particularly painful. He examined his childhood, his relationship with achievement, the way he had learned to equate net worth with self-worth, the terror of vulnerability that had driven him toward a woman who asked nothing of him because asking nothing meant he could never fall short. He contacted Pamela's attorney through proper legal channels, with respectful, formal language that made no demands and carried no entitlement. He requested the opportunity to meet Gabriel. The response took 2 weeks. When it arrived, it was in the form of a legal document. 5 conditions, non-negotiable, supervised visitation only, Pamela present at all meetings, no media, no photographers, no publicists, no documentation of any kind, consistency. If he committed completely. 1 missed visit without genuine emergency justification, and the arrangement would be terminated permanently. No financial discussions. Pamela did not want his money. This was not negotiable. If at any point Pamela determined that his presence was detrimental to Gabriel's well-being, the arrangement would end immediately and without appeal. Jonathan read each condition 3 times. Then he signed every one without objection, without negotiation, without asking his attorney to suggest modifications or protections or the kind of strategic hedging he would have demanded in any business agreement. Because this was not business. This was a chance, the only one he would get, and he understood with perfect clarity that the woman offering it would not offer it again. He prepared to meet his son, and for the first time in his life, Jonathan Edwards was genuinely, profoundly, terrifyingly afraid, not of a quarterly earnings miss, not of a hostile board vote, not of the kind of corporate adversity he had spent his career conquering with confidence and strategic brilliance. He was afraid of a 4-month-old boy who weighed 7 pounds and had his eyes and did not know he existed. He was afraid of not being enough, which, ironically, was the first sign that he might be becoming enough after all. Jonathan flew to Vermont on a Saturday morning in late June. He took a commercial flight, not the private jet, not the first-class cabin with the lie-flat seats and the personal attendant, coach, middle seat, between a woman knitting a scarf and a teenager watching videos on a phone without headphones. He could have taken the jet, could have arrived in comfort and convenience and the particular insulation that wealth provides against the ordinary discomforts of being human. But something in him understood that the man who took private jets was the same man who had lost everything that mattered. And if he was going to become someone different, the becoming had to start with the small things, the uncomfortable things, the choices that cost something other than money. He rented a car at the airport, a sedan, not the luxury SUV his assistant would have arranged. He drove 40 minutes through Vermont countryside that looked like a painting he did not deserve to be inside of. Green hills and white farmhouses and stone walls that had been standing longer than his family had been wealthy. Everything here was old and real and permanent in ways that made his glass tower in Richmond feel like a set that could be struck at any time. He checked into a hotel in town, not a resort, a hotel, 3 stars, clean sheets and a coffee maker and a view of a parking lot. He set his bag on the bed and stood at the window and tried to remember the last time he had been in a room this ordinary. He could not remember, and that fact told him everything about the distance between the life he had been living and the life he needed to build. He texted Pamela, professional, brief. I have arrived. Checked into the hotel. I will be at your address tomorrow morning at 10 as arranged. Thank you again for this opportunity. She responded 9 minutes later. Confirmed. 10 a.m. Do not be late. He was not late. He was 30 minutes early. Parked on the street outside a white farmhouse with green shutters and a porch that wrapped around the front like arms welcoming you home. Flowers in window boxes. A tire swing hanging from an oak tree in the side yard. A mailbox with hand-painted letters that read, Carter. This was where his son lived. This farmhouse in Vermont with the flower boxes and the tire swing and the hand-painted mailbox. This was the home Pamela had built while he was sleeping in a penthouse decorated with her choices and pretending she had never existed. He sat in the car for 20 minutes, watching the house, trying to prepare himself for what was about to happen. His therapist had told him to focus on being present, not performing, not impressing, not trying to compress years of absence into a single perfect moment. Just be there, Dr. Calloway had said. Let the moment be what it is. You cannot control how it goes. You can only control whether you show up honestly. At 9:58 he got out of the car, walked up the front path. His shoes crunched on gravel that sounded louder than it should have. Every step amplified by the quiet of a Vermont morning and the deafening noise inside his own head. He reached the porch, raised his hand to knock, and then stood there, fist suspended in the air between intention and action, unable to close the distance between wanting to knock and actually doing it. The door opened before he could. Dorothy stood in the doorway, Pamela's mother, a woman in her early 60s with gray hair cut short and practical, and eyes that assessed him with the kind of thoroughness usually reserved for suspects in a lineup. She did not smile. She did not extend her hand. She looked at him the way you look at something that might be useful, but could also be dangerous, with caution, with reserve, with the particular skepticism of a woman who had held her daughter while she cried and was not inclined to make things easy for the man who had caused the crying. You are early, Dorothy said. I did not want to be late. There is a meaningful difference between not being late and being early, Mr. Edwards. Not being late shows respect for other people's time. Being early shows anxiety about your own. Jonathan absorbed this. She was right. He was anxious, and she had identified it in 4 seconds flat. Pamela's directness suddenly made much more sense. Come in, Dorothy said, and she stepped aside to let him enter. The house smelled like coffee and something baking. Bread maybe, or muffins. A warm domestic scent that belonged to a different world than the one Jonathan inhabited. A world where things were made by hand and nourishment was an act of love, rather than a service purchased from a personal chef. The living room was small and comfortable. A couch with quilted cushions, bookshelves overflowing, photographs on every surface. Pamela's childhood, her design school graduation, her wedding. Jonathan stopped at that one. A framed photograph of the two of them on the coast of Maine. Wildflowers in her hands, his face crumpled with happy tears. Both of them looking at each other like the world was small enough to hold in the space between them. The photograph was still displayed. She had not removed it. He did not know what to make of that. "She is in the kitchen," Dorothy said. "And Jonathan." She waited until he turned to face her. "That boy in there is the best thing my daughter has ever made. Better than any dress. Better than any business. If you hurt him, if you disappoint him, if you make him feel for one single second that he is not the most important thing in any room he enters, I will make what Pamela did in that cathedral look like a gentle conversation. Are we clear? We are clear. Good. Kitchen is through there." He walked through the doorway into a kitchen that was bright with morning light. Yellow curtains. A wooden table scattered with fabric swatches and a laptop and a half-empty coffee cup. A high chair in the corner with remnants of what appeared to have been a cereal-based breakfast on its tray and its occupant, and the floor beneath it, and possibly parts of the ceiling. Pamela stood by the counter, Gabriel on her hip. She was wearing jeans and a gray sweater and no makeup, and her hair was pulled back in a loose knot that suggested function over appearance. She looked nothing like the woman in the black Valentino who had walked into his wedding and changed the trajectory of multiple lives. She looked like a mother on a Saturday morning. Tired and present and absolutely formidable, Gabriel was gnawing on a wooden teething ring and regarding the world with the unfocused intensity of a baby who had recently discovered that objects existed and was not entirely sure how he felt about it. Jonathan stopped in the kitchen doorway, and everything inside him went very still. His son, 4 months old, dark hair already thick enough to suggest the same stubborn growth pattern Jonathan had been fighting since childhood. Round cheeks, small fists, and eyes that were unmistakably, undeniably his. He had seen photographs of himself as a baby. His mother kept an album, dog-eared and precious, and pulled out every Thanksgiving to embarrass him in front of whoever he had brought home that year. In those photographs, baby Jonathan had the same dark eyes, the same serious expression, the same quality of looking at the camera as if he was trying to figure out whether it was worth his attention. Gabriel had that expression now, turned toward the stranger in the doorway, evaluating, deciding, 4 months old and already possessing the particular gravity of someone who would not be easily impressed. Pamela watched Jonathan watching Gabriel. Her expression was unreadable, the neutrality of someone who had prepared extensively for this moment and was now executing the preparation with the discipline of a professional. "Ground rules," she said. Her voice was steady, clinical, the voice of a woman laying out terms that were not open for discussion. "You do not pick him up without asking. You do not raise your voice. You do not make promises you cannot keep. If he cries, you hand him to me. If I say the visit is over, it is over. Understood?" "Understood." She studied his face for a moment, looking for something, sincerity maybe, or the absence of performance. Whatever she was searching for, she appeared to find enough of it to proceed. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the kitchen chair nearest to where she stood. Jonathan sat, his hands on his knees, his posture carrying the rigid tension of someone who understood that the next few minutes were more important than any negotiation he had ever conducted, and that no amount of preparation or strategy could help him through it. Pamela shifted Gabriel from her hip to a more forward-facing position. The baby blinked at the change in perspective, discovered the stranger sitting at eye level, and regarded him with open curiosity. "Gabriel," Pamela said. Her voice softened, just slightly, just enough to reveal the mother beneath the negotiator. "This is Jonathan." She did not say your father. Jonathan noticed, and he understood. That title was not given. It was earned, through time and consistency in the kind of patient, unglamorous showing up that could not be faked or delegated or accomplished through a single meeting, no matter how emotionally charged. He looked at his son, and his son looked back, and then Gabriel smiled, It was the gummy, open-faced smile of a baby who has not yet learned that smiles should be conditional, who does not know about betrayal or absence or the complicated adult arithmetic of who deserves what. A smile that was pure and reflexive and directed at a stranger for no reason other than that the stranger was there, and the morning light was warm, and the world was still simple enough that presence was sufficient cause for joy. Jonathan's composure dissolved, not dramatically, not with the theatrical collapse of someone performing emotion for an audience. Quietly, like ice melting, his eyes filled. His jaw tightened. He pressed his hand to his mouth and breathed through the spaces between his fingers. He had closed deals worth billions of dollars. He had spoken before audiences of thousands. He had navigated corporate warfare with steady hands and clear eyes. But a 4-month-old baby smiling at him in a Vermont kitchen on a Saturday morning destroyed every defense he had ever built. "Ken the First," he started. His voice broke. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Can I hold him?" Pamela hesitated. Her arms tightened around Gabriel. An involuntary reflex. The body's instinct to protect before the mind can override it. She looked at Jonathan, at his wet eyes and his trembling hands and the raw, desperate wanting on his face that had nothing to do with negotiation and everything to do with need. She looked over her shoulder. Dorothy stood in the doorway, watching, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable except for the slightest nod, almost imperceptible. The grandmother's assessment that this particular moment was safe enough to allow. Pamela turned back to Jonathan, and with the deliberate, controlled movement of someone handing over something irreplaceable, she placed Gabriel in his arms. The weight of his son settled against his chest. 7 pounds at birth, heavier now. 4 months of growth fueled by Pamela's milk and Dorothy's muffins and the fierce determination of 2 women who had decided this child would want for nothing. Jonathan held him, not expertly. He did not know how to hold a baby. Had never held one before this moment. His arms were stiff, and his hands were uncertain, and he was holding Gabriel the way you hold something fragile that you are terrified of breaking. "Like this," Pamela said, and she adjusted his arms, moving his left hand to support Gabriel's head, shifting the baby's weight into the crook of his elbow, her fingers brushing his forearm as she repositioned him. The first physical contact between them in 14 months, brief and functional and charged with everything neither of them was saying. Gabriel settled into the new position, looked up at Jonathan's face, and made a sound, a soft cooing noise that babies make when they are comfortable and curious and processing the fact that the world contains new people and new smells and new arms that feel different from the ones they know. Jonathan looked down at his son, and something in his face changed, not softened, changed, the way a landscape changes when the light shifts. The same features rearranged by a different quality of illumination. He was not performing fatherhood. He was experiencing it, for the first time, in a kitchen in Vermont, 14 months too late and right exactly on time. "He has your chin," Pamela said. It was the closest thing to warmth she had offered him since the cathedral. "He has your everything else," Jonathan replied. "Thank God." Pamela almost smiled. Almost. She caught it before it fully formed and rerouted it into a neutral expression that gave nothing away. But Jonathan saw the almost, and it meant more to him than any full smile from anyone else ever had. The visit lasted 90 minutes. Jonathan sat on the kitchen floor while Gabriel lay on a blanket and attempted to roll over. The baby had been working on this skill for a week, according to Pamela, rocking side to side, building momentum, getting almost there before gravity pulled him back. Jonathan narrated the attempts with the kind of detailed commentary he usually reserved for quarterly earnings analysis. "Okay, good momentum on that one. You had the hip rotation, but your shoulder did not commit. Let us try again. Really drive through with the left side this time." Gabriel did not understand the commentary, but he seemed to enjoy having an audience. He rocked harder, grunted with effort, his small face scrunched with concentration, and on the 7th attempt, he rolled, from his back to his stomach, landing with a surprised expression and a small squawk of triumph. Jonathan cheered, not politely, not with the restrained clapping of a man at a polo match. He cheered the way people cheer at sporting events, with volume and genuine joy and the total absence of self-consciousness. His fist pumped the air. His voice filled the kitchen. "You did it, Gabriel. You did it. That was incredible. That was the greatest athletic achievement I have witnessed in my entire life, and I once watched the Giants win the Super Bowl from the 50-yard line." Gabriel stared at him, overwhelmed by the volume. His lower lip trembled, the wobble that precedes crying in babies who have been startled by enthusiastic adults. Pamela reached for him, but before she could pick him up, Gabriel's expression shifted. The lip stopped trembling, the startle faded, and he smiled again. That same gummy, open, unconditional smile, directed at the loud stranger who was apparently very excited about his rolling abilities. Jonathan looked at Pamela. She looked at him. And for one moment, the 14 months between them compressed into something thin enough to see through. Not transparent, not gone, but thin, like ice in spring, still there but showing cracks. The visit ended at 11:30. Pamela said it was time for Gabriel's nap. She said it factually, without apology, because the schedule of a 4-month-old supersedes the emotional needs of adults, and she was not going to disrupt her son's routine for anyone. Jonathan handed Gabriel back. The transfer required him to let go, which turned out to be significantly harder than he had anticipated, not because Gabriel protested. The baby went to his mother with the easy comfort of someone returning to their natural habitat, but because Jonathan's arms felt suddenly, painfully empty, a specific kind of emptiness that he had never experienced before and would never be able to unfeel. "When can I come back?" he asked, standing in the kitchen doorway, his car keys in his hand, his voice carrying the careful restraint of someone trying very hard not to beg. 2 weeks, Pamela said. Same conditions. I will be here. He paused, wanting to say more, wanting to say everything, wanting to apologize again and promise again, and explain that the last 90 minutes had fundamentally rearranged his understanding of what mattered in the world. But Pamela's expression told him that more words were not what this moment needed. This moment needed him to leave, to go back to his 3-star hotel, to sit with what had just happened, and to come back in 2 weeks and do it again. "Pamela, thank you. I know I do not deserve this." "You are right. You do not. But he does." Jonathan nodded, walked out of the kitchen, through the living room, past the wedding photograph that was still on the shelf, past Dorothy, who was standing by the front door with the same evaluating expression she had worn when he arrived. "You held him like a sack of flour," Dorothy observed. "I have never held a baby before. Obviously, you will need to practice. There are videos online. Watch them before you come back. My grandson is not a learning exercise." "Yes, ma'am." Dorothy studied him for another moment. Then something in her expression shifted. Not warmth. Not yet. But the faintest relaxation of suspicion. The preliminary assessment at this particular specimen might not be entirely hopeless. "He cried the whole time you were holding him." "He did not cry," Jonathan said. "He made one noise. That was discomfort." "That was a conversation." Dorothy's mouth twitched, not a smile. "The ghost of one." 2 weeks, she said. "And watch those videos." He drove back to his hotel, parked in the lot, sat in the car for 20 minutes because his vision was too blurred to walk safely across the parking lot. And when he finally got to his room, he lay on the bed in the 3-star hotel with the view of the parking lot and stared at the ceiling and felt something he had not felt in years. Not happiness. That was too simple a word. Something more structural, like a foundation being laid. The first concrete poured into forms that would eventually support something worth building. He opened his phone, searched YouTube for how to hold a baby properly, watched 7 videos, took notes, because Dorothy had told him to practice, and he was not going to show up in 2 weeks holding his son like a sack of flour. The 2 weeks passed slowly. Jonathan worked, went to therapy, restructured his schedule to ensure that every other weekend was completely blocked. No meetings, no calls, no acquisitions or board dinners or any of the things that used to fill his time and make him feel important while simultaneously keeping him from everything that actually was. He called Pamela once during those 2 weeks, not to talk about himself, to ask about Gabriel. "How is he?" Jonathan asked, his voice carrying the hesitant tone of someone who knows they are not yet entitled to casual conversation, but cannot help wanting it. "He is fine," Pamela replied. "He rolled over 3 more times yesterday. He seems to have figured out the technique, the hip rotation." Pamela paused. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she laughed. "Yes," she said, "the hip rotation." It was a small laugh, brief and involuntary and immediately retracted. But it happened. And Jonathan held onto it the way a man lost at sea holds onto driftwood. Not because it will save him, but because it proves the shore exists. He returned to Vermont 2 weeks later, and 2 weeks after that, and 2 weeks after that. Every visit the same structure, same conditions, same rules, but each visit slightly different in texture. Slightly warmer, slightly more like something that could eventually, with enough patience and consistency, become real. He learned to hold Gabriel properly, watched the videos, practiced on a pillow at home until his arms memorized the right angles and pressures. When he held his son for the second time, Pamela did not need to adjust his arms. Gabriel settled against him like he remembered. Like the shape of his father's embrace had been stored somewhere in the 4-month-old architecture of his body and recognized it when it returned. He learned Gabriel's sounds, the happy COO that meant contentment, the sharp cry that meant hunger, the whimpering fuss that meant tiredness, the frustrated grunt that meant he was trying to reach something and the world was not cooperating with his intentions. He learned Gabriel's face, the way his eyebrows drew together when he was concentrating, the way his mouth opened in a perfect circle of surprise when something unexpected happened, the way he looked at Pamela, the absolute certainty in his eyes when his mother entered the room, the knowledge, bone deep and proverbial, that this person was his center, his safety, his home. Jonathan wanted Gabriel to look at him that way someday. He did not expect it, did not demand it, but he wanted it with a ferocity that frightened him because he had never wanted anything this much. Not money, not power, not the Forbes covers or the board seats or any of the things he had spent his adult life accumulating like armor against the terror of being ordinary. He wanted his son to look at him and see home. Months passed. The visits continued. Jonathan restructured Edward's capital, promoted his COO to handle daily operations, delegated more than he had ever delegated. His board pushed back. His investors questioned his focus. Business media ran speculative pieces about whether the cathedral scandal had permanently impaired his judgment. He did not care. He had spent his entire career caring about what the market thought of him, what the media wrote about him, what the board whispered about him in closed sessions. And all of that caring had produced exactly one result: a life so perfectly constructed and so completely hollow that a woman had to walk into his wedding with a diaper to show him what he was missing. He was done being hollow. He opened a satellite office in Vermont, small, functional, a converted space above a bookstore in town where he could work 3 days a week and spend 4 days being a father. It was not glamorous. The ceiling was low and the heating was unreliable, and the bookstore owner played folk music at volumes that penetrated the floor. It was the best office he had ever had. Gabriel grew, as babies do, at a pace that made Jonathan understand why people say it goes fast. One visit he was rolling over. The next, he was sitting up. The next, he was reaching for things with an intentionality that suggested the world had become something he intended to interact with rather than merely observe. His first solid food was sweet potatoes. Jonathan was there for it. Pamela had started to relax the visitation structure, not dramatically, incrementally, the way trust is rebuilt, in millimeters rather than miles. She let Jonathan feed him, handed him the tiny spoon and the bowl of orange mush, and watched with an expression that was equal parts amusement and evaluation as Jonathan attempted to navigate the logistics of putting food into a baby's mouth. When the baby in question had strong opinions about the trajectory of the spoon, sweet potatoes went everywhere. On Gabriel, on Jonathan, on the high chair, on the floor, on surfaces that sweet potatoes should not have been able to reach based on the known laws of physics. Gabriel found this hilarious. He laughed with the full-body joy of someone who had discovered that food could be entertainment and decided to commit entirely to the concept. Jonathan laughed too, covered in orange mush, his $5,000 watch spotted with sweet potato, kneeling on a kitchen floor in Vermont looking like a man who had lost a fight with a root vegetable. And happy, genuinely, absurdly, unperformably happy. Pamela watched from the doorway, and something in her face shifted. Not the controlled almost smile she had permitted during the first visit. Something more vulnerable, more dangerous. The expression of a woman watching a thing she had wanted to see for a very long time and had trained herself to stop wanting. She shut it down quickly, efficiently, the way she shut down anything that threatened the wall she had spent 14 months building. But Dorothy saw it. From her position at the kitchen table, where she had been pretending to read a newspaper for the past 40 minutes, Dorothy saw the shift on her daughter's face and said nothing. Because some things need time to grow before they can survive being spoken aloud. Gabriel's first word was mama. Of course it was. He said it on a Tuesday afternoon while Pamela was working at the kitchen table, and he was sitting in his bouncer on the floor beside her. He looked up at her and said it with the casual certainty of someone stating an obvious fact. Mama, as if he had known the word all along and had simply been waiting for the right moment to deploy it. Pamela cried, not the controlled, quickly sealed tears of the cathedral or the first visit. Real crying. The kind that comes from a place so deep you did not know it was there until it opened. She picked him up and held him and said the word back to him. Yes, baby. Mama, I am right here. Mama, she told Jonathan during their next video call. He called twice a week now. Brief conversations, updates on Gabriel's progress, small exchanges about logistics and schedules that had become comfortable enough to occasionally include personal observations. He said mama today, Pamela told him. His first word. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick. Of course it was, he said. She earned that. It was the right response. Not jealousy. Not disappointment that his name had not been first. Acknowledgement. Recognition. The understanding that Pamela had spent every hour of every day for months being Gabriel's entire world, and the word mama was not just a word. It was a testament to everything she had done alone. Something unlocked in Pamela when he said that. A small door she had not known was still locked. She did not open it, but she felt the mechanism release, felt the possibility of opening become real for the first time. Gabriel pulled himself to standing for the first time during one of Jonathan's visits, using Jonathan's index fingers as leverage, small fists gripping with the intensity of someone attempting a summit, his legs shaking, his face scrunched with effort. And then he was up, standing, wobbling, supported by the hands of a father he was only just beginning to know. The look on Gabriel's face, the astonishment of a person experiencing height for the first time, the realization that the world looked different from up here. Jonathan held steady, let his son grip his fingers for as long as he needed, did not let go even when his arms ached from holding the position. This is the view, Jonathan told him quietly. From up here, everything looks different. You are going to love it. Gabriel responded by sitting down abruptly and looking confused about where the height had gone. 10 months after the cathedral, the test came, the one that would prove whether Jonathan's transformation was real or merely a sustained performance. Edwards Capital was finalizing a $1.2 billion acquisition, the Shanghai deal, the one his assistant had tried to tell him about on the day of the failed wedding. It had been renegotiated and restructured and was now in its final stages. The board required Jonathan's presence in Singapore for a week of face-to-face negotiations. The same week, Gabriel was going to walk. Pamela had mentioned it casually during their last video call. He is cruising everything, she said, holding onto furniture and walking along the edges. He let go for about 2 seconds yesterday before grabbing the couch again. It is coming. Any day now. Jonathan called his COO, explained the Singapore timeline. His COO was capable and experienced and had been handling increasingly significant responsibilities as Jonathan restructured his priorities. I need you in Singapore, Jonathan said. His co was quiet for a moment. Jonathan, this is the biggest acquisition in the company's history. The board expects you personally. I understand what the board expects. They will not be happy. They will adjust. He called Pamela next. Gabriel is going to walk any day now, is he not? Probably. Why? He explained the Singapore situation. The silence on her end of the phone was familiar. The particular quality of quiet that Pamela deployed when she was protecting herself from disappointment. The preemptive withdrawal of expectation, so that when the letdown came, it would find nothing exposed to damage. Go to Singapore, Jonathan, she said. Her voice was carefully neutral. It is your company. Gabriel will not remember whether you were there for his first steps, but I will remember. 3 words. Simple. Direct. Carrying the full weight of everything Jonathan had spent 10 months learning about what mattered and what did not. Business deals close. Stocks recover. Board members adjust. But your child walks for the first time exactly once. And you are either there or you are not. And if you are not, you carry that absence forever. I am coming to Vermont, he said. Jonathan, I am coming. My COO will handle Singapore. He is more than capable. If the board has concerns, they can schedule a meeting for the following week. But I am not missing this. Pamela was quiet for a long time, long enough that Jonathan checked his phone to make sure the call was still connected. Okay, she said, and the word carried something it had never carried before. Not permission, not neutrality, something warmer, something that sounded like the beginning of belief. He flew to Vermont. Coach, middle seat, the now familiar routine of ordinary travel that he had come to prefer because it made him feel like a person rather than a brand. He arrived on a Thursday evening, checked into the same 3-star hotel, same room, same parking lot view. He had requested it specifically, not because it was comfortable, but because it had become part of the ritual, part of the practice of showing up without performance. Friday morning he was at Pamela's house. Gabriel was in the living room, cruising the furniture with the determined focus of someone who understood that the next phase of human development was within reach and was approaching it with appropriate seriousness. Jonathan sat on the floor, across the room from Gabriel. Pamela sat on the couch. Dorothy stood in the kitchen doorway. All 3 adults watching a baby hold onto a coffee table and contemplate the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of letting go. "Come on, buddy," Jonathan said softly. "You have got this." Gabriel looked at him, looked at the gap between the coffee table and his father. Approximately 4 feet of open carpet, an impossible distance, an ocean of uncertainty, a leap of faith measured in footsteps that his legs had never taken independently. He let go of the table. Pamela inhaled sharply. Dorothy pressed her hand to her chest. Jonathan held perfectly still, not breathing, not moving, just being there, present, available, an anchor on the other side of the impossible distance. Gabriel stood unsupported for 3 seconds, wobbling, his arms outstretched for balance, his face carrying an expression of absolute concentration. Then he stepped. 1 step, wobbly, his whole body shifting to accommodate the unfamiliar mechanics of forward motion. Then another step, more confident, his weight settling into the rhythm of it. Then a 3rd step, faster, because momentum had taken over and his body had discovered something his mind was still processing. He could walk. The 4th step was more of a controlled fall, his legs moving faster than his balance could manage, gravity pulling him forward and down toward the carpet. But before he landed, Jonathan's hands caught him, scooped him up, lifted him into the air. And Gabriel laughed. The pure, uncomplicated, full-body laughter of a child who has just accomplished the impossible and been caught by someone he trusts, not the conditional trust of adults who calculate risk and hedge their bets and hold back pieces of themselves in case things go wrong. The total, unfiltered trust of a baby who does not know that the man holding him almost was not here. Almost chose a conference room in Singapore over a living room in Vermont. Almost missed this. "You did it," Jonathan said. His voice cracked on every word. "You walked. Gabriel, you walked. That was 4 steps. 4 steps. You are incredible. You are the most incredible human being I have ever witnessed, and I have met 3 presidents and none of them even come close." He was crying, not hiding it, not containing it, standing in the middle of Pamela's living room, holding his son above his head with tears running down his face and joy radiating from him like heat from a sun. Pamela was standing now. She had risen from the couch at some point during those 4 steps. She was in the doorway between the living room and the hall, and she was crying too, silently, without realizing it. The tears moved down her face with the quiet inevitability of something that had been held back too long and could not be contained anymore. She wiped them quickly, pretending it was nothing, pretending the sight of Jonathan catching their son had not cracked something inside her that she had spent 14 months sealing shut. "You came," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I told you. I am not going anywhere." And for the first time, she believed him. Not cautiously, not provisionally, not with the hedged, conditional, almost belief she had been offering in careful increments over the past 10 months. She believed him, fully, with the kind of certainty that requires you to let go of the coffee table and trust that the ground will hold you. The Singapore deal closed without Jonathan. His COO handled it flawlessly. The acquisition went through. The stock recovered from its brief dip. The board sent a reluctant internal memo, acknowledging that Jonathan's leadership delegation model was effective and perhaps even advantageous in certain high-stakes negotiations. Jonathan forwarded the memo to Pamela with one line, Turns out I am not indispensable at work, only at home. She did not respond for 3 hours. When she did, the message was 4 words long. That is a start, but she was smiling when she typed it. Dorothy saw the smile from across the kitchen and said nothing. Because some things need time. Weeks later, a Thursday evening in October, Gabriel asleep upstairs. Dorothy retired to her room with a book and a cup of tea and the particular discretion of a woman who understood that some conversations needed to happen without witnesses. Pamela and Jonathan sat on the back porch of the farmhouse, 2 mugs of tea between them on the railing, the Vermont darkness pressing in around the porch light like velvet, stars overhead that you could not see in Richmond or New York or any of the cities where Jonathan had spent his adult life being important and being empty. The silence between them was different than it used to be. Not the hollow Sunday morning silence of a marriage eroding, not the tense, guarded silence of supervised visitation. Something else. Quieter, deeper, the kind of silence that exists between 2 people who have enough history to fill the air without speaking and enough respect not to. Pamela broke it. Can I ask you something? Not as Gabriel's mother, just as me. Anything. Why? Why did you choose her? I have never understood it. We were good together. We had plans. And then Vivian appeared, and suddenly none of it mattered. I need to understand what I was not enough of. Jonathan was quiet for a long time, not gathering a performance, not constructing a strategic response, sitting with the question, letting it settle into the honest part of him that he had spent 10 months excavating from beneath decades of armor. You were everything, he said. That was the problem. Pamela waited, not prompting, not filling the silence, giving him the space to arrive at truth at his own pace. You challenged me, Jonathan continued. You saw through me. You expected me to grow. And I was terrified, not of you, of myself, of not being able to become the man you deserved. I looked at you, and I saw everything I was supposed to be, and I was paralyzed by the distance between who I was and who you needed. Vivian was safe. She did not ask me to be better because she did not believe I needed to be. She let me stay exactly as I was. And at the time, I was too much of a coward to realize that was the worst thing someone could do for me. You chose comfort over connection, Pamela said. Yes, and it cost me everything that actually mattered. The words hung in the Vermont air, true and heavy and impossible to retract. I spent 14 months hating you, Pamela said, building my empire on the fuel of what you did to me. And it worked. Anger is a powerful engine, but it is not sustainable. I am tired, Jonathan. I am tired of carrying what you did like it is my burden to bear. It was never your burden. It was mine. I am the one who failed, but I am the one who has been living with the consequences. Jonathan absorbed this, the truth of it, the injustice of it, the fact that his choices had not just hurt her once, but had continued hurting her every day for over a year, through every midnight feeding, every solo morning, every moment when she reached for someone in the dark and found only empty space. I am sorry, he said, and the apology was different from any he had offered before, not the strategic sorry of a man managing damage, not the reflexive sorry of someone caught. This was the sorry of a person who has done the work of understanding exactly what they broke and exactly why it mattered and carries the weight of that understanding every day. Not the kind of sorry that expects forgiveness, he continued, the kind that knows it does not deserve it. I am sorry I chose comfort over you. I am sorry I said she understood my world, when the truth was she just did not challenge it. I am sorry I let you drive away in the middle of the night without fighting for you. I am sorry I never signed those papers, not because I wanted to keep you, but because signing them meant admitting that what I did was real and permanent. And I was a coward. I have been a coward for most of my life, but I am trying not to be one now. Pamela was quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight, that takes up space. That means the person inside it is doing the difficult internal work of deciding what to do with something heavy they have just been handed. I am not ready to forgive you, she said finally. I might never be, but I am ready to stop letting what you did be the loudest thing in my life. I am ready to let it become background noise instead of the entire soundtrack. That is more than I deserve. Yes, it is. But it is not for you. It is for me, and for Gabriel. He deserves a mother who is not defined by her worst chapter. They sat in silence after that. A long time. 2 people who had broken each other learning to exist in the same space without bleeding. The tea went cold. The stars shifted. The porch light hummed. And somewhere in the darkness, a cricket began to sing, which seemed about right, because crickets sing in the space between day and night, in the threshold, in the in-between, in exactly the kind of moment where something old is ending and something new has not yet begun. 1 year later, Gabriel was almost 2, walking, talking, mostly mama and dada and no, which he deployed with the frequency and conviction of a tiny dictator who had recently discovered the power of refusal. He was obsessed with stacking blocks and knocking them down, building towers and destroying them, and laughing at the destruction with the delighted cruelty of someone who had not yet learned that some things once knocked down cannot be rebuilt. Jonathan had fully relocated to Vermont. The satellite office above the bookstore had expanded into the space next door. Edward's capital had adjusted. The stock was performing. The board had stopped questioning his commitment and started questioning why they had ever insisted on his physical presence for things his COO handled better. Pamela's empire continued to expand. Pamela Designs had boutiques in 8 cities. The foundation served over 2,000 single parents. She had been featured in Vogue, not as a scandal survivor, not as the woman who walked into a billionaire's wedding, as a visionary, a designer, a businesswoman whose work spoke louder than her history. They were not together. She and Jonathan. They were not a couple. They were not romantic. They did not hold hands or share meals by candlelight or do any of the things that stories like this are supposed to build toward. But they were something without a convenient label. Co-parents who respected each other, partners in the project of raising a human being. 2 people who had destroyed what they had and were building something different in its place. Not the same thing, not a reconstruction, something new, built on different materials, honesty instead of romance, accountability instead of passion. The daily unglamorous practice of showing up and doing the work even when the work was boring and the showing up was inconvenient. They had joint birthday parties, shared holidays, a custody arrangement built on trust rather than legal compulsion. Gabriel moved between 2 homes with the easy confidence of a child who had never known instability because both his parents had made stability their highest priority. Gabriel's 2nd birthday party, Dorothy's backyard, a small gathering, Pamela's team from the Vermont office, a few friends from town, Dorothy presiding over a cake she had spent 2 days making, blue frosting, because Gabriel was currently in a blue phase. Everything had to be blue. Blue cups, blue plates, blue balloons. The tyranny of a toddler's aesthetic preferences. Jonathan was attempting to set up a bouncy castle he had ordered online. He had been attempting this for 45 minutes. The instructions were in a language that appeared to be English but was arranged in an order that defied comprehension. The electric pump made a noise like an asthmatic vacuum cleaner. The castle itself seemed to have opinions about its own inflation that did not align with Jonathan's intentions. Pamela found him tangled in nylon fabric, reading the instruction sheet upside down with the focused confusion of a man who could restructure a billion-dollar corporation but could not figure out which end of a bouncy castle was the entrance. "You are reading it upside down," she said. "I am reading it the only way it makes sense," Jonathan replied, "which granted is not very much sense, but rotating it does not improve the situation. I have tried all 4 orientations." "Give me that," Pamela said. She took the instructions. "Read them. Identified the problem in about 8 seconds. You have the pump connected to the wrong valve. This is the exit vent. The intake is on the other side. How do you know that?" "Because I read the diagram instead of the text. The text is useless. The diagram is clear." Jonathan looked at the diagram, looked at the valve, moved the pump. The castle began to inflate with immediate and satisfying results. "You are better at everything than I am," Jonathan observed. "Not everything," Pamela said. "You are better at holding babies. You got good at that. I watched the videos. Your mother was very insistent." They stood together, watching the bouncy castle take shape. Gabriel toddled toward it with the urgent enthusiasm of a person who had just discovered that large inflatable structures existed and could not believe no one had told him sooner. He climbed in, fell down, laughed, climbed up, fell down, laughed harder. The simple, repeated joy of a child who understood that falling was part of the fun and getting back up was the whole point. "We did okay," Jonathan said quietly, watching their son bounce and fall and laugh and bounce again. "We did the work," Pamela corrected. "There is a difference. He nodded. There is. And I will keep doing it. I know, Pamela said. And she did, not because she was naive, not because she had forgotten what he had done, not because the scars had disappeared, or the walls had fully come down, or the memory of a diamond earring on a bathroom counter had stopped hurting entirely. She knew because she had watched a man prove himself through 1,000 small, boring, consistent choices, through sweet potato disasters and middle seat flights, and 3-star hotels, and YouTube videos about how to hold a baby, through first steps caught and Singapore deals missed, and apologies that expected nothing in return, through the daily undramatic practice of showing up and staying and choosing what mattered over what was easy. Those choices spoke louder than any words he could have offered in a cathedral. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the bouncy castle had been deflated and folded with significantly less difficulty than it had been inflated, after Gabriel had been bathed and read to and sung to sleep with the particular off-key tenderness that Jonathan brought to bedtime routines, after Dorothy had retreated to her room with her book and her tea and her quiet satisfaction, Pamela sat in her studio. It was late. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that settles over a home when everyone in it is safe and sleeping and the only person still awake is the one who built it all. She was sketching, a new piece for the spring collection, not the armor she used to design, not the structured defensive garments that said I survived you and I did it alone. Something different, something with movement, with openness, with the kind of lines that suggested the person wearing it was not bracing for impact but reaching for something. She did not know what to call the piece yet. She would figure it out. She always did. The name would come when the design was finished, when the thing itself told her what it wanted to be called. Her phone buzzed on the drafting table. A text from Jonathan. A photo of Gabriel's blocks stacked 6 high, the tallest tower he had ever built. Blue blocks, because everything was blue. Beneath the photo, a caption, "New record. He gets his determination from you." Pamela looked at the photo, at the blue tower, at the small hand visible at the edge of the frame, still reaching, still building, still believing that the next block would hold. She typed back, "He gets it from both of us." Set the phone down, returned to the sketch. And the story ended not with a grand gesture or a dramatic declaration or the kind of cinematic resolution that makes audiences feel like everything has been neatly resolved and nothing will ever hurt again. Because real stories do not end that way. Real stories end in the middle, in the ongoing, in the quiet Tuesday night moments that no one sees and no one applauds and no one writes headlines about. The story ended with a woman drawing in silence, a child sleeping upstairs in a room painted blue, a man in a house 3 miles away who had learned, at great cost and through persistent effort, that the measure of a life is not what you build, but who you show up for. And it ended with the understanding that walked Pamela to that cathedral in the first place. The understanding that carried her through 14 months of building alone, and 10 months of learning to trust again, and a lifetime of becoming someone who did not need to be saved but was brave enough to let someone stand beside her anyway. The people who break you do not get to decide whether you heal. You decide that for yourself, every single day. And if this story has moved you, if it made you think about your own walls and your own rebuilding, and the question of whether survival is enough or whether you deserve something more than just getting through, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that like button. Every like tells this algorithm that stories like this matter, that real, emotional, complicated human stories deserve to be seen and heard and shared. Second, share this video. Send it to the friend who is in her own 14 months of silence, the brother who is trying to become someone better, the parent who is showing up, even when it is hard. Send it to the person who needs to hear that broken things can be rebuilt if you are willing to hold every shard. Third, subscribe to Mr. Dawson Stories and turn on that notification bell, because this is what we do here. We tell stories that make you feel, stories that make you think, stories that remind you that your worst chapter is not your last chapter. And the story you are living right now, the messy, complicated, beautiful, painful one, it is worth telling. I am Mr. Dawson. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember, the bravest thing you will ever do is not surviving what broke you. It is choosing to live again after. I will see you in the next one.